General Greshik has been part of our Oceanside group for a long time, years, and he's got a great background, Air National Guard. He flew for Eastern Airlines, retired with United. So anyway, it's good to, he's got good company. Obviously Vietnam. The only thing I did is I made bombing charts for that part of the country when I was in the Air Force. So I was yelled at in anger, from sergeants, but I was never shot at. Anyway, General Greshik, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Gene, talking about being shot at, a Marine once told me that the most exhilarating thing was to be shot at without effect, and I think a number of us really feel that. But I thank you for the intro. It's great to be here. Kathy and I drove over last night and had a nice dinner with some friends. Great time. I'm always a little curious when they hand the pilot a mic. It's kind of a dangerous thing. First of all, you never know what's going to come out of his mouth. And the second part of it is a pilot never wants to give up the mic. So if he's got an audience, he's always going to tell it. So it's Kathy and I have been married this coming. She thinks it's the 9th, and I think it's the 12th, our anniversary of April 9th. 35 years, and it's hard to believe, but we talked about it last night. She has never heard my spiel, so, and I have to tell you, I am a little bit nervous because Kathy was a high school teacher, and I'm not sure what my grade will be after this, so, my lovely little lady. It's always good to know your audience. Now, I heard some of the folks in here. How many of you folks were involved in the Second Indochina War, aka the Vietnam War, aka the Yankee pilot rebellion? How many folks were over in Vietnam? Well, that's impressive. So I'm going to have to mind my P's and Q's here on this. How many folks actually flew on the trail? Okay. And I know we've got a fact here. Same time what was it, 02?
01.
01, I was there 70, 71 at NKP, and you'll hear that. Any other facts in here? There we go. I may embarrass you with this, folks, but I found out FAC stands for Forward Air Control. And some people, when you mention you're a FAC, they think that there's a G on the end of that. So please don't get me confused with that. All right. I got a lot of slides here. As always, pilots have too many things to talk about in too little time. But I do want to start off with a 6-minute clip. It's a film that was put together by the folks in Laos, an organization. As you recall, Laos is now a communist country, and there is a tinge of propaganda there, but I think it's well done, and it'll start my show off so you get a flavor of what I'm talking about. So with that, and I'll do a slide presentation. At the end, I have a 2-minute clip if we have time. And that's when I'll answer your questions, so if you would hold your questions to the end.
That's after a few drinks.
Can you dim the lights?
Yeah, dim the lights.
Okay.
ศสาธารณรัฐประชาธิปไตยประชาชนเป็นประเทศน้อยหนึ่งอยู่ในอาเซียนตะวันออกเฉียงใต้และมีประเทศรอบข้างเรียกว่าไทยพม่าจีนเวียดนามและเขมรเป็นประเทศที่มักความสงบและสันติภาพและถือพุทธศาสนาซึ่งชนเผ่าทั้งหมดมี68ชนเผ่าและประเพณีของพระเจ้าธรรมชาติและทรัพย์สินนั่นยังอยู่ในครอบครัวและยังมีทนไทยอยู่เป็นมรดกโบราณทุกวันนี้ยังบ่รู้ว่าประวัติศาสตร์สมัยสงครามเวียดนามหมวดเวียดมินใส่ประเทศลาวเป็นทางขนส่งเอิ้นว่าทางโฮจิมินห์อเมริกาเป็นพวกต่อต้านคอมมิวนิสต์และพวกเขาตั้งการสงครามลับที่จะทำลายทางโฮจิมินห์เป็นทางลับของพวก CIA.
Security of all Southeast Asia will be endangered if Laos loses its neutral independence. I want to make it clear to the American people and to all the world that all we want in Laos is peace, not war.
People of the United States are entitled to know everything that they possibly can with regard to any involvement of the United States abroad. As you know, in answer to a question that Mr. Potter asked at the last news conference, I pointed out what were the facts, but there are no American combat groups in Laos. ลาวมีประชาชน3 ล้านเกือบ2 ล้านเป็นชนเผ่าลาวมีทหารที่ป้องกันประเทศและต่อต้านชาติใหญ่ของโลกเพราะอเมริกาเป็นชาติใหญ่ตั้งแต่อเมริกายุดทิ้งระเบิดใส่เมืองลาวถึงปัจจุบันนี้ 34,000 คนยังตายจากระเบิดที่ยังบ่แตกอยู่นั้น 30% เด็กน้อยที่ตายในระเบิดที่บ่แตกของเมืองลาวส่วนหลายเป็นเด็กน้อยที่ว่าขุดเอาเศษเหล็กไปขายเป็นราคาสวยพ่อแม่กันเจ้าลาวเป็นชาติหนึ่งของโลกที่ถูกระเบิดทั้งใจเมืองลาวเกือบถึง3 ล้านต้นแผ่นลายก่อนสงครามโลกครั้งที่ 2แต่ละ8 นาที24 ชั่วโมงถึง10 ปีระเบิดตกใส่แดนลาวสำหรับคนลาวแล้ว1 ต้นเพื่อคนในชาติUNEXPO ลาวเป็นชาริตี้ของอังกฤษที่ช่วยเหลือทำลายระเบิดที่ยังบ่แตกในลาวนี่เป็นชาริตี้อันเดียวของโลกที่ทำอย่างนี้เจ้าทำลายเป็นแสนแต่ละปีแล้วก็ยังเป็นโก้อยู่ในบ่อ
This is Operation Barrel Roll, and Barrel Roll was part of the country, the northern part. Once we get the slide up there, I'll point out some other things. The point of this film is Laos was the most heavily bombed nation in the world ever. There were more bombs dropped in Laos than all the conventional bombs dropped during World War II in both Europe and Japan. 2 million tons of it. You see, Laos, it's shaped like a pan. In fact, the bottom part is called the panhandle. And the northern part is barrel roll, and we're looking at a country the size of Utah. From the north to the south, probably 600 miles, and at the narrowest point, probably 60 miles. So, a very small country. And that pretty much points out the barrel roll. This area up here, the PDJ, is where the folks that we were supporting during the war were involved. And you'll see heavier attacks up there, and then as you come down to the south along the trail, this is called Steel Tiger, was the name that was given. This spot right here is where I flew out of, MKP, Nakhon Phanom. And that's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Nakhon Phanom there, I would fly over to an area called Magia Pass and then down to Chapon, this area right here. Other facts further south were usually situated in Vietnam, but the folks that handle this area up here were flying out of Nakhon Phanom, which is in Thailand, right on the Mekong River. That's MKP Nakhon Phanom, scratched out of the jungle, all special force and military. And there's an element of truth to that. Okay, what's a forward air control? Basically, you fly low and slow, you look for the targets, and you try not to be one. Those are the airplanes that we flew out of our base at Nakhon Phanom. Our call sign was Nail. I was actually Nail 98. The black airplanes, the one I flew at night, and then I'd sometimes fly them in the OV-10 during the day. Black airplane, the O2 Cessna, we flew both day and night, but 90% of my missions were at night. The OV-10 on the right, that was all day work. 23rd Task, we lost during the war 45 airplanes and 27 pilots. I think if I'm going to talk about Ho Chi Minh Trail, I need to talk about a group of facts that had a special history there. The agreement was made in 1962 that all parties would get out of Laos, all foreign countries. The Geneva Accord was signed by communists and the Americans. The Americans got out, and the communists didn't. So we couldn't have any ground troops there, but nothing said that we couldn't do bombing there. So in order to support the bombing, there was an effort to bring on certain people, forward air controllers that had experience for a 6-month tour. And those folks came in and they had to lose all their identity. Their uniforms were gone, given different names, and they were called Ravens. They operated out of Laos in a number of strips, and it's kind of a ragged bunch of guys. They never, in 8 years, never mounted to more than 300. Half of them were either killed or wounded. 60% were shot down. They flew the O-1, which this is, the T-28, which this is, and they flew out of these remote strips. This is Lima site to the north near the PDJ, the plane of jars, and and heavy activity supporting the indigenous forces to the north in the trail. That doesn't show up. But this gentleman had flown his last mission, shot down. He was paralyzed, had to retire from the service, got out of service. And his name is Fred Platt. Is Fred Platt. He was shot down 10 times in those 6 months. And they gave him the name of Magnet. And he richly deserved that, but he recently passed away. But these were a brave group of folks, and my hat's off to the Ravens. Interdiction, this is what we did. We just bombed, tried to stop supplies coming down with whatever means we had. And that intrepid aviator is me before a night mission, flying a black airplane, got flares on the wings and ground burning logs that you try and drop down near a truck, which would illuminate green or yellow or red. And you direct the fighters to try and intercept the trucks. There were no windows on the side of the airplane. Why? Because you hung out of the airplane on the right side with a starlight scope. This is where we launched out of. Most of the missions were over, and I'm going to talk a lot about this area right here, McGeer Pass. NKP was 65 miles. Why wasn't it 70 miles? 70 miles would be in Vietnam, or North Vietnam. If you were in North Vietnam and caught there, you'd be grounded. You'd lose your wings. Rules of engagement. Couldn't fly it. Another area was Chapone, a very dangerous area. So from here down to here is where we worked on this route segment. We used an early form of night goggles. This was a starlight scope. Two pilots, the one on the right side, be hanging out the window looking for trucks. We called them movers. So you wanted to get the movers and bring in airstrikes and, of course, try and eliminate them. Ho Chi Minh Trail. Ho Chi Minh Trail is a series of paths, roads, streams, 20,000 or 12,000 miles, heavily defended. Upwards to 100,000 folks manned the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They were anti-aircraft, gunners, people in the supply network, truck drivers, the whole set. But they estimate close to 100,000 folks worked the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Folks up in the north never called it the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They called it the Tung Son Road, or Highway 559. Why 559? Supplies started coming down in May of 1959. And so that's the road, the name they gave it. Americans called it Ho Chi Minh. They called it the Blood Road, which is a good book, by the way, if you want to read it. Most of it just said the trail. There's Uncle Ho. Uncle Ho fought the Japanese. He fought the French. He defeated the French in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu, and then he took on the Americans. Uncle Ho died in the fall of 1969. He is still revered to this day as kind of a living god. Ho Chi Minh Trail, what is it? Well, it's sometimes 2 and 3 canopy of jungle, streams, paths, routes for folks to bring supplies down. 2/3 of Laos is mountainous, and these mountains are different. These are called karst, vertical hills that if you bail out on those, it was pretty deadly in a number of cases. Limestone karst that covered the whole area. And of course, they do have monsoons there, so you did have the vegetation sometimes up to 150, 200 feet. Enemy loved caves. Why? Because that gave them shelter. They could put supplies in there. They had their hospitals there. These mountain areas were loaded with caves, and the enemy used them to their advantage. You might, it's hard to see here, but sorry. This particular one has been hit, tried to get bombs through that. Now, of course, the laser bomb going there very easy, but you tried to bring bombs in there, and it's kind of a hit-miss opposition. More caves. During my time over there, 70-71, the rules of engagement were you couldn't attack the trucks if they were in their own country, in North Vietnam. So what the truck drivers did, and the enemy knew our rules of engagement very well. I think Washington sent Hanoi a copy of the rules of engagement, so they knew what we could or could not do. So late in the afternoon, they bring their trucks up, park it right at the edge of the border between North Vietnam and Laos, and they'd sit and wait until it got dark. Then they'd start moving those trucks down the trail. Lots of, and these could carry, depending on the size, probably 4 tons of supplies. They generally always had camouflage on top. Ingenious how they got through some of these passes. Run a couple cables through, and have a volunteer get in the truck and try and drive it across for you. And you can go through a gorge that way. This is an interesting picture. I'm not there at stage, but these are the truck drivers. Let me tell you, folks, these were brave men. I don't know what the attrition rate was, but it had to be very high. I'm not sure how accurate this is. A lot of the drivers were ladies. Why? So that the men could be freed up. These are all men. They have vests on it. These vests really didn't do much good when you're bombing them. More psychological. If you notice all the trucks, only one light. The rest of them are taken off. Why is that? Well, when they traveled at night, if it was moonlight, they didn't use their lights. And if it was dark, only the lead truck would have his lights on. The other would be following close, maybe with a small reflector behind. But they all just had one light. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but they were scrambling. Okay, the enemy loved their bicycles. They learned this during fighting the French, how they could bring supplies over the mountains to get the French at Dien Bien Phu. These bicycles, you'll notice, are modified. They got an extension to the handlebar and the seat up here. He's holding this. Those bikes could carry up to 600 pounds. And they, especially in the rainy season when the roads were kind of jammed, they used these a lot. See the extension and the thing, and probably the rainy season here. They used elephants. Lots of spies coming down with elephants. This is probably hard to see. This is a convoy that's been hit the night before, and they took a picture of it the next morning. All of them are pretty much burned out. The enemy was very good of getting the trucks off the trail so you couldn't get a count on them, and wouldn't be long before all those would be moved off and hidden in some way so that you couldn't get an accurate account of just how many trucks were destroyed. Okay, during the war, and I'm talking about the war in the north and everything, 12 years and 3 months of war from 1961-1973, there were 2,257 fixed-wing airplanes shot down from Army or Attrition, from the Air Force, Marines, and the Navy. The SAMs and MiGs, only 9% of that 2,257 were lost to those two weapon systems. The bulk, the very heavy number, were lost to these weapons right here. And I'll talk about those since they were a big part of my life over there. This is the 23 millimeter, high rate of fire, used tracers. Tracers were important in that. If I could see them coming out of the barrel, in fact, the reason I'm standing here today is because I could see the tracers coming up and do a break with it. This is a 23 millimeter ZPU. High rate of fire. Bad news, the good news is the barrels would heat up after an hour or after 100 rounds, but they could change those barrels very quickly, so that was it. This is 37 millimeter. Look at the gun there. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Looks pretty simple, doesn't it? This gun came out, Russia developed it, came out in high production in 1939. And on the Eastern Front, this gun, no modifications, just pretty much this gun, shot down 14,657 Axis German airplanes. This one gun here. They made over 20,000 of them, and thus this gun showed up in Vietnam and in Laos. This was the gun that would greet me at night and send me home. In Megia Pass or Chapon, those two areas that we worked, it was not uncommon to see 6, 8, 10 of these guns coming up at once. They, actually a wonderful system. 7-man crew, weighs about as much as your Suburban, 4,800 pounds. An 1.5 inch slug going up to about 11,000 feet. And they used tracers. They put in 5-round tracers, 60 rounds a minute, and they had a lot of ammunition. This was their quintessential weapon. And I'm going to say something here that you're probably not going to believe. This gun shot down more American airplanes than any other weapon system in the war. Because of this, just the numbers of them and the capability of the crews. I'm even going to go a little further. I'm going to say this gun destroyed more airplanes than all the other SAM systems put together, or anti-aircraft systems put together. This is 37 millimeter in front of our operations. I used to sit on the little pad with one hand. This is a rusted old gun, and twirl it just very easily. It was greatly balanced, greatly done. And you'd see them at night, and you could spot them, and you'd come out the next day, and they'd be gone. Why? Because they could just pull them out of there with an elephant or something, and they'd be gone. And if you don't believe how much I liked or appreciate this gun, Hanoi Jane absolutely loved this gun. One picture worth 1,000 words. .57 millimeter. I did not like this gun for two reasons. It didn't use tracers. You can't break for something you can't see. It's twice as heavy as the 37 millimeter. There weren't that many. If you saw 37 millimeters, you may see one of these. But what made this a dangerous weapon was radar control. Okay, This is the 100 millimeter. I'm not talking about an 85 millimeter because I don't think there were any in the South. The folks up north had 85. This is 100 millimeter. I hope I have time for my one big gun story. I came out one night and my operations officer said, tonight you're not going to look for guns or for trucks moving. You're going to look for a gun, a very big gun. And he says, if you go out to a point called the Chokes Point between Chapon and Brigadier, I want you to orbit out there because at 1 o'clock or just before 1, there's going to be a cell of 3 B-52s, arc light, that is going to be coming over. And for the last couple of weeks, the B-52s have been shot at by a big gun out here. And these SAC crews have been writing themselves up for big medals because they've been having the japers scared out of them with this gun. So I went out and orbited, and I could see the contrails. It was at part moonlit night. These B-52s coming one behind the other about a half mile apart in trail, and they had to look like they were up earning their astronaut wings. They were way up there. Well, by the time I thought nothing happened, the gun started popping, and it popped 3 rounds. First round took forever to get up there, but a round would climb at a rate of a second per 1,000 feet, and I think it was well over 30 seconds. The first round hit just behind lead, and the second two had, except 2 and 3 had number 2 bracketed. Well, I got the location of the gun, so called it in. Now there's 2 things you can do. If you know where the gun is, and you're on a bomb run, you just move your IP point over on your run, and you avoid the gun, right? So that would have been a simple thing, but the other thing they could do is try and bomb it. What do you think Strategic Air Command did? For 2 days they saturated bombing this area, and they put everything on this gun. Pause. Did they kill it? Don't know because it never came up again, but it could be they're trying to look for volunteers for gun or something. It never came up. SAM 2, guideline. Early in the war, it took 12 of these SAMs to bring down an American airplane in 1965. 3 years later, it took 48 of these to bring down an American airplane. Why is that? Well, ECMs, tactics, the whole works. A very dangerous weapon system. And that's, of course, in the north, a SAM site. They call it the flying telephone post. Saw 2 of them one night, one above, one below. Reported it, and they didn't believe me because they weren't supposed to be in there until a week later we lost an airplane. This is a 105, very lucky. You see the SAM coming up on the left side, he avoided that. This 105 wasn't lucky. He's trailing smoke, and he soon had to get out. I'm going to devote a minute to talk about the folks that flew up north and prevented those supplies to reaching the Ho Chi Minh Trail. There were hundreds of airplanes were shot down. And I'm going to talk about one airplane and the story involved with it to kind of capsulize just the sacrifices that were made. Some of you folks may recognize this. This is the Paul Doumer Bridge. Mile long, just outside of Hanoi. It brought supplies from China, brought supplies from Hmong Harbor that were offloading from the ships. 26 trains would pass over that every day, and hundreds of trucks bringing supplies, which ultimately would be going down the trail. So this was off limits. To want to upset our friends, it was off limits until the 11th of August, 1967. Those wonderful people in Washington finally cleared this target to be hit. So it was hit the same day, and there wasn't a loss, and there was some damage. So the next day they decided to hit it again with 2,000 and 3,000 pound bombs, F-105s. And whenever you send up a strike, you also have a reconnaissance bird that follows behind to take pictures. The enemy knows this, and they're waiting for that recce bird to come through. In this case that I'm going to be talking about, the Air Force sent up 2 recce birds, 2 RF-4Cs from Udorn. Well, one of them was hit with a SAM, and his buddy's taking his picture, by the way. And the tail was blown off at this point. Both of the men get out. The pilot in the front was named Captain Edwin Atterbury. The gentleman in the back, his name was Tom Parrott, another captain. They bailed out and they were rescued just about over the top of Hanoi. They were prisoners. Well, less than 2 years later, Captain Atterbury made an escape attempt with a man named John Dramacy, and they got out the roof of their little encampment called the zoo, and over 12 hours they made it 3 miles before they were captured. And after they were captured, every POW, with very few exceptions, was then beaten and tortured. And what of our 2 pilots that were captured? Well, Captain Dramacy, a 105 pilot, was tortured for 36 days, nearly died, and he survived. And Edwin Atterbury lasted 10 days. He did not survive. His remains came home 1 year after the last of the POWs released on March 13th, 1973. Tremendous sacrifices. And that is Captain Atterbury. And this is the bridge that same day that they took pictures of. They started bringing these down the trail. Not easy, but they did. They're very ingenious how to get things down. And as I say, I only saw 2, one above, one below, and very impressive. This is called a SAM-7 Strela. Heat seeking, looks like a bazooka. They started coming down in our area after I left. Fortunately, I have to deal with those. They're very dangerous. The last 2 forward air controls shot down in the war were brought down by this missile. By the way, the SAMs brought down 205 American airplanes. The MiGs brought down 90 of American airplanes, mostly with the MiG-17, which this is, Fresca, and the MiG-21. This is the Farmer MiG-19, some effect, but not that much. And this is the fish bed, MiG-21. A lot of countries, there's a number of countries still use this airplane. Big part of the Indian Air Force. Okay, other things will kill you on the trail. At night, the ground is your enemy. And if there's monsoons or clouds out there, a lot of airplanes were lost. You can see one of our, O2s here that did battle with the ground. Mid-airs. Okay. The big thing, the mid-airs would get you pretty heavy if indeed you were not safe. We started bombing choke points, which were prominent areas, and there were 4 of them. Magia Pass was one. This is Magia Pass, and at the north here is North Vietnam, and this is Magia Pass. So they started coming down here. We started bombing those every day. First of all, with small fighter bombers, and then some results, but not much. And then we brought in the big iron, the B-52. 30 tons, 108 bombs, and it really chewed up the ground, let me tell you. Flight 3, whenever you flew. 10 times of what the B-17 could carry. Tear up a strip for 1 1/3 long, about 1/2 mile wide. Totally destroyed. So the trail started getting chewed up. Again, this is the before picture, triple canopy. This is the after picture. It has now turned it into a sandbox. Each one of those is bomb parked and no more jungle. I put in the World War I picture, Battle of the Somme. This is it. No man's land, to give you a comparison. They travel a day here in the dry season and the wet season. Killed a bulldozer one day here. All right, certain things were used to try and get the folks out. Agent Orange, a group called Jasons came up with these things. Agent Orange, which everybody's heard about in Vietnam, but it's also used in Laos. They also used a chemical called colgan, which is a detergent that Dow came up with. If you mix it with dirt in the rainy season, it would turn to a gumbo and restrict movement. They also tried seeding the clouds, Operation Popeye. They seeded the clouds from July, 5 years, dropping 2,600 sorties with 47,000 canisters on the trail, trying to control the weather. But the big one that they came up with, this Jason group, was Eagle White and the McNamara line. And that was a string of sensors that would detect movement, sound, smells, the urine of soldiers going by, the radio frequencies. It was $1 billion project that was put in by the infamous Robert McNamara, probably the most controversial man of our time. And these were the sensors. This is an acoustic sensor, sending up signals. First of all, they were dropped out of airplanes, and then they had to be dropped out. So, what you do is, sensor goes off, goes up to a drone, goes down to a computer, 2 of the biggest computers in the world at that time, IBM 365. Signal is scrambled. Now this is a drone airplane that was above. Signal is scrambled, goes into a computer. The computer says there's 4 trucks moving along Route 1211. They call the fact, you destroy it. That's the gist of it. And these were called pinball wizards. Control. Lots of different drones. Right now, there were 20,000 of these put on the trail. This was the beginning of what we have on our southern border. We have 12,000 of these on our southern border. They tried dropping these sensors that look like doggy do. The only problem is there were no dogs on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. All right, involved in, and I'm going to go over here a little bit. Gene, he's given me the roundup, but I do have some more slides. I was involved in an operation called Lam Son 719. We flew out of South Vietnam near Quang Tri, just below the DMZ. 20,000 South Vietnamese troops were going to cut the trail, stop the supplies, do everything, supplied by Air Force, helicopters, fighters, bombers, whatever. Started on 8 February, lasted 2 months, and it was a complete disaster. Intelligence was wrong, command and control was poor, leadership was lacking, and we lost 1,441 men, 728 helicopters were damaged or destroyed. That's, you could navigate at night off the pile of helicopters that were there. And that's the invasion. This was the proof that Vietnamization would not work, right here, but nobody, as happens, the South declared a victory and we went on. Ho Chi Minh Trail today, and I'll go through these fast. Craters all over, in fields, and remnants of the war. There's maybe the 100 millimeter that I may have bombed. This is an F4 with 450-gallon tanks on it, and many times they were dropped. If you were engaged or had stuff coming up, you dropped those white wing tanks, and the enemy made good use of those. That's pretty clever. Okay, what's the legacy of the war? Well, CBUs were dropped, 416 million of these. 1/3 of them were duds. And they came in a canister, 670 of them, and they each had a 300 metal pellets that would go off. It dropped out of the airplane, canisters came off, spilled on the ground, there you have it. So these are CBU 26s. And this is what you see today in Laos. They're trying to clean up these bombs, these CBUs, they call them bombies, and the others, but the resources have been very limited. They do have metal detectors, but what has happened is it's become a cottage industry for young people because they can find the metal, sell it, and help support their family. They don't know anything about these bombs, but they're just looking for metal. Young kids. And this is what happens. So that's it. Heavy bombing to the north, the barrel roll. The Ho Chi Minh Trail to the south, heavy bombed. 1/3 of the bombs didn't go off. And I don't think you can read this next slide because it's too small, but I'll go through it real quick since I'm about ready to get the hook. War lasted from 61-75. Bombing campaign in Laos was for 9 years, 64 to 73. Area the size of Utah, there were between 2 and 2.5 million tons of bombs dropped. And it's, again, I mentioned more bombs than were dropped in Europe in World War II, conventional bombs. At the rate of $17 million a day was spent. 2 tons of bombs for every man, woman, and child. 1/3 of the bombs didn't go off. And basically, it's a mess over there right now. This is my post-Vietnam career, and I don't think we have time for that last 2-minute clip. So,
Let me ask, anybody want to see a 2-minute clip?
We're good.
Yes. He's good.
This is a democracy, you know.
This 2-minute clip, it's, somebody spent a lot of time on this, putting dots on where every bomb, this is a sortie, this isn't the bomb you're gonna see up here. The red are the cluster bombs, the green are the heavy bombs, and it starts in 1965, goes to 73. But you're gonna get a flavor of just, and again, this is only the Air Force. The Navy and Marines aren't even in this. So look and see what the bombing was at that time. These are just sorties. Each one of these could be as many as 108 bombs. This is when I was there, 71. Give you a perspective of just what a mess it was. An estimate was for every truck killed, probably cost about $100,000. And there were thousands of trucks killed. All right, questions? I have a question I'm going to ask you. Why were there so many duds? 30%.
Well, there were 2 bombs.
Well, many of the big bombs,
Microphone. Many of the big bombs, why were there so many duds? 1/3 of the bombs never went off. Many of the bombs were from World War II, and the fusings were from World War II. And they had a shelf life that who knows how long, but hey, they're there, let's use them. Another reason was, especially with the cluster bomb units, those CBUs, this was a testing field to see what worked, what didn't, research and development. Many of these things were dropped without knowing how many would go off or what wouldn't go off. Another reason, in the heat of battle, you're outside your window envelope for dropping many of these things, especially when 37s and 57s are shooting at you. Another reason, the Navy would take off with a bomb load, and they'd have a primary target in South Vietnam, and if it was weather or something, they couldn't drop there. So they'd come over to the folks at night on the trail and say, hey, we got these bombs, what do you got? You splash them, you put them down, and off they go back to their ship. So obviously other reasons, but those are the big ones I come up with. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Could you mention anything about your interaction, if any, with General Vang Pao and the forces, PDJ? And
General Van Pao, of course, was in charge of the Hmong tribe up in the PDJ. Actually, Ted Ballas went to his funeral here about 3-4 years ago. I didn't interact with him, but the Ravens did. That Raven group worked right at his headquarters at Lima Site 20 Alpha, and he was quite a character.
so you didn't interact with any indigenous forces in Steel Tiger then, basically?
No, I did not. Other people did. They had groups out there called Prairie Fire that were putting in groups to try and find out what the supplies were. But the Ravens were right in-house working that they were sheep dipped, which is a term that a lot of people don't know. And it's because when they were shot down, they would have plausible deniability. Do you know what that means? You're on your own. You're on your own. And so these were these were folks that were out there, you get shot down, it's not a good life. Yes, sir.
Did you have any interaction with the Channel 97 raid that went on way up north?
The raid, the Sante raid, actually I did indirectly. I was flying that night when the Sante raid, everybody know what that is? It was a raid that was made to try and get the folks out of a POW camp called Sante, up 20 miles west of Hanoi. It was a success, but it was a failure. Success was they went in and they killed a number of folks, destroyed things, but the prisoners had already been moved. So, and was I involved in that? Indirectly. I was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail that night at Laos at McGee Pass, and trucks were moving. It was a full moon at night, but there was no ordinance because it was all saved for if things went wrong there. So Gene has given me the cutoff here, so I'll be after if you have any other questions. But I appreciate it, folks. Thank you.